If you want to print with something 3D, you're kind of stuck. But did you know that you can use Play-doh to do it? And I'm going to show you today how you can do that. I recently got hold of these old watch keys and I thought they're such interesting shapes that would be really fun to print with. So I'm just rolling out the Play-doh, and I usually find that if you squash it down with your hands just to begin with, and then I move on to the roller just to get it even. And I've discovered that if you do it on paper, it tends to stick to it, which is why I'm using this plastic paint tray. So I'm just rolling it a little bit more here. And then what I find is that the underneath bit gets smoother. So that's the bit I'm going to use to print with. This is my first time of trying out the Play-doh. So I wasn't quite sure how far to press the shapes in, but it worked out okay. I just pressed them in enough to, I guess, just a couple of millimeters just to get the shapes. And I'm doing it in kind of a random pattern that just pleased me. I'm just using some acrylic paint, which is what I use most of the time, and I'm laying the Play-doh on quite sort of gently. I wasn't sure quite how much pressure to apply, and I think I peeled it back to have a look and decided it wasn't lifting enough of the paint surrounding the shapes as much as I'd like. So that's why I put it back down and pressed a bit more. So before the paint could dry, I'm using just some cartridge paper and pressing it down, giving it a little bit of pressure to try and get as much paint off the plate as possible. One thing I did find is that there's a bit of oil in Play-doh, and sometimes that can interfere with how the paint takes. But this one turned out okay after I did a little bit more rubbing just to make sure I was getting as much off the plate as possible. So not too bad for my first attempt. I then thought I'd have a go with some plant material. Unfortunately, I seem to manage to have not filmed when I'm actually pushing it into the Play-doh. I used an Echinopsis flower head, which is a big round sort of thistle, so normally that would be very difficult to print with. And this time I'm using ink on my plate rather than acrylic paint. I've been doing more experimenting and playing with these inks, and I'm going to do a more detailed video about it. But they're the sort that you use for either etching or relief paint, and they're very different consistency to acrylic paint because they're much more viscous and you only need a tiny bit, and it's a little bit more work to spread it out, but then it doesn't dry down nearly as quickly as the acrylic paint, so you don't have to rush. And I found that you get a lot of detail with this, so that's why I decided to do some more, and as I said, you'll see that in another video. So here's my Play-doh with the imprint already in it. Again, I wasn't sure quite how far to press it in. You can almost see it's come through to the other side, and doing exactly the same thing. I'm pressing it down onto the plate to try and get good contact. I thought this was an interesting result, but not entirely successful. You can't really tell it's a plant. So I thought I'd try with some fossils and things that I've got in my cabinet of curiosities. And this is a lovely ammonite. I'd like to say I found it myself, but I think we bought this one in a shop in Lyme Regis. But it's got lots of lovely detail. And if you tried to put that directly onto a jelly plate, you wouldn't get all those indentations, and I thought I'd sort of use it like a stamp, which is why I'm cutting round it. And again, I'm using the etching ink with this, and I'm using it more like, as I say, like a stamp to make an overall design. I thought that could be useful as a background for something else. And these inks, these ones that I'm using are by a company called Play-doh. And what I like about them is that although they're oil-based, you can just wash up with soap and water, which is really good. The other good thing about using Play-doh for objects like this is that I wouldn't really want to get paint directly on the shells and the fossils. So because this is a two-step process, they should stay clean in theory. And again, I'm using cartridge paper. I just put this other piece over the top just because the paper didn't quite go to the edge of the plate, and I just wanted to remove the bits at the side. As you can see, I'm already getting quite a lot on my hands, but as I said, you can just wash it away with soap and water, so it wasn't a big problem. So I was pleased with how much detail I managed to get, although it was kind of diminishing returns. The first couple of prints were much the best. But I liked the effect so much, I thought I'd just use it with the ammonite as a feature rather than all over. So I'm using the etching inks again, and I decided I did one print which came out rather nicely. I then did a second one with the same impression, and I think 2 is probably the maximum to get really clear prints from. I then thought I'd have a go with, I've got this rather beautiful sea urchin that has got very small sort of indentations on it. Again, if I try to do that regularly on the Gelli plate, I don't think you'd get a very satisfying print, but because of the 3D quality that you can get on the Play-doh, I thought I'd have a go. So for the first one, I decided to use the bottom of it, and I was being the shell itself is quite delicate, so I'm only pressing a certain bit, and it might not show on camera, but the dimples have transferred to the Play-doh. And I think because I was using this oil-based ink that's really fine and picks up lots of detail, I was really pleased with how much you could see of the dots there. So I thought I'd try with the other end of the urchin now. I'm just putting just a little bit more. You can see what a thin layer I'm putting over the plate. It looks like there isn't so much in the middle, but that was more to do with how it was sticking to the paper on the other side. So it is more of an even coverage than it looks. And there you can see both ends of the shell, which you wouldn't be able to print in any other way, so I think that's quite successful. So for the last one in this session, I thought I'd have a go. I've got a nautilus shell, again from my cabinet of curiosities, and it's a half one. So on the reverse side, you'll see that in a minute, it's got this absolutely beautiful spiral pattern that follows a mathematical formula. I think it might be the Fibonacci sequence, but it's very beautiful. And again, this is something I wouldn't want to use directly because I wouldn't want to get ink or paint on it. But by using it with the Play-doh, it was an opportunity to get a good print with it. So this wasn't a perfect print. You can see there are a few blotches, but also you can see how beautifully you can see the spiral pattern. And because there was still quite a lot of ink on the plate, I thought I'd go for a second ghost print as well. And here's the result of my experiments with this session. I was really pleased. Obviously there's still, I could refine them, but for a first attempt with these objects, I think they've come out really nice, and this method's got lots of potential. But because the ones using the Nautilus shell were a little bit blotchy, I thought I'd just do a couple more and try and get a cleaner print, which I think I managed to do here. So this is on another occasion, and again I'm using the etching inks, etching or relief inks. It doesn't really matter when you're just doing jelly printing with it. And I'm using the same objects again because I just really like the effect. But slightly differently, I decided as well as doing a print onto the jelly plate, I'd then use what I'd actually made with the Play-doh and use that as a stamp to see if that would work. So I'm just using, I haven't put any extra ink, it's just the ink that was ready on the Play-doh, and I'm getting another piece of paper and pressing with it to see if I get a reasonable image with it. And I said that these inks don't dry nearly as quickly as acrylic paints do, so you've got time. You know, I didn't put a piece of paper straight down on this plate, but that's fine. So now time for the big reveal. Has it worked? I was kind of blown away how much detail there was when you think that it's already been on the plate. But that's because you've got a negative and a positive shape. So it's the ink that it's taken from the plate creates one design, and when you use it as a stamp, it creates the opposite design. So you've got a positive and a negative. And then because I liked that so much, I decided to do the same thing with the Nautilus shell. So I've rolled out the Play-doh again, trying to get it as smooth as possible. And again, I'm going to try and get this, use it both as an imprint on the plate and as a stamp. And again, you can see how successfully that's worked. So I'm just putting another thin layer of the ink onto the plate. And then this time I thought I would add it to a print I already had on some thinner paper. So this is on, I think it was on some calligraphy paper. I just grabbed this piece because it was close to hand, but I actually really like the effect of combining the ammonite with the plant. So I hope you'll see that this is like a really fun method that's got loads of potential, and perhaps you'll have a go yourself. And I hope you've enjoyed seeing what I managed to do with it. So thanks for watching, and see you again soon.